All righty. Well, welcome everyone to this month's International Women in Biomechanics meeting. I am really excited to talk to you all about disability allyship today. Before we get into that, we have just a few updates. So hopefully everybody got the February newsletter that came out last month. The March one will be coming out soon. If you didn't get that email, please email us at admin@intwomenbiomech.org. Both allies and members should be receiving these newsletters, but we switched some things up with our Google situation, so we just want to make sure that people are getting our messages. Also, we are going to be holding our first round of elections. So the elected positions that we have are president, secretary, and treasurer. Each of those is a 2-year term, and we'd love for people, everybody is welcome to let us know if you're interested to self-nominate, or if you want to nominate your member friends. Please let us know by March 13th. And then all the other positions are also out there, and they're going to be appointed by the elected officers. So you can use that same roles and responsibilities spreadsheet and interest form that Anna just shared to let us know you're interested in one of those positions as well. And so we'll be doing the elections later this month, and terms are going to start in July. Last slide about that. Here's the links that Anna just shared. Yeah, please take a look at the roles. Let us know if you have questions about the roles. We are totally on board to discuss things, and we just love anybody who wants to volunteer and help out in any way. Next, so this is a reminder, we just published an article at the beginning of, or the very end of last year, beginning of this year. It was like, it was right on the cusp, I think at the end of December. So we have an article in Journal of Biomechanics. You can suggest it for your lab's journal club. My lab had a discussion on it, and it was really enjoyable. You can include it in your class's reading list, talk about it on Twitter, all sorts of those things. We encourage conversation around it. And so our Nominate Women, as part of the Empowering Allies Committee, is working on nominations for ASB awards. I believe this is the last round of ASB awards that are taking nominations prior to the conference this year. And that would be the Early Career Achievement Award and the Pre-Doctoral Award. Those are both due at the end of this month. If you want help from us in any way, please let us know by March 10th. If you don't want help from us, but you are getting nominated or nominating someone, just let us know, because we'd love to hear if women from IWB are getting nominated for these. We have also shared this before, but if you've missed a meeting or two, we have all of these email addresses now, and so this is how you can get a hold of the executive council outside of Slack. You can still always Slack us as well, but if you have inquiries for any of us, you can send an email to one of these email addresses. If you don't know where it should go, just send it to admin, and Ashley will forward it along. And then within Slack, if you're not on Slack, let us know. We can get you on Slack. But there's a lot of different channels. The browse channels is kind of cool because it'll show you stuff you're not a member of yet. You can find other people. You can post questions. You can help other people out when they post questions. Here's a little roundup of what happened in February on the right side of this slide. But lots of people engaging in cool conversations about stuff on Slack. So join us if you haven't already. And this is my last reminder slide. Our next meeting is coming up April 5th. This is going to be on National Biomechanics Day, and it's going to be really cool because it's a live stream of National Biomechanics Day events that are going on. So please check it out, and we'll be putting out some information and reminders about that meeting coming up. Does anybody have any questions, announcements of their own, anything they want to talk about before we launch into the main topic of today?
I'll give a plug. Julia and I are doing a reading challenge. So for Women's Month, History Month in the US, we're trying to read one paper a day by a women biomechanist author. And I've got my paper for the day actually, because Erica just posted her paper that she just published. So I'll put it in the chat as well. But yeah, if you have if you have suggestions for papers, or if you just published a paper, please post it in our Site Women channel, and yeah, we'll read it. We'll read it together. So yeah, that's my announcement.
I am working on getting my slides up. Of course, they always do things that you don't expect them to when you go to present. So bear with me for just a moment. Can you see my presenter view or the actual slides?
Actual slides, looks great.
Awesome. All right, okay, let's get started. I want to thank you all again for coming. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I'm pretty sure part of the idea of what I wanted to talk about today came out of like me waking up in the middle of the night and having this meeting plan in my head. So thank you all for indulging me and coming and listening. Just a little bit about me to start. So I am the Empowering Allies Committee lead for IWB, as well as the treasurer. And we created this committee. I became the lead of it because I'm really interested in allyship in all its forms. And I wanted to try to make a difference and learn a lot. And I have learned so much so far. So hoping to share some things with you. A little bit more about me is that my research right now and for my PhD focused on rehabilitation of walking in people with chronic stroke. And to get there, I've studied biomedical engineering, rehabilitation science, and translational research. I have served as a caregiver for a disabled person. My dad had a stroke in 2009, and that's really what drove me into this research area. And I myself have an invisible disability, or invisible disabilities, I guess. Most of mine center around chronic pain. So some days I look and act and feel like a quote unquote able-bodied or normal person. And then other days I can't really get out of bed because I'm in too much pain or because moving is hard. And it's definitely shaped how I experience the world. And I'll tell you a couple of things I've learned in the process through these different slides. It also gave me the opportunity to meet other people with disabilities and sort of join some communities that have taught me way more than I would have ever imagined. So I'm very grateful for that. Want to give a couple disclaimers up front. As I said, I am a rehabilitation scientist, so I do have some training in this area. I've taken some coursework, but disability as a whole is not my specialty, and I am not an expert. I'm a person who identifies as disabled, and I'm going to share my perspective. I'm going to share perspectives from people I know or people I've gotten to know, and I'm going to share some research and some published things. But really, as the one person who's leading this meeting, I am one researcher and one disabled person. So I don't speak for all disabled people. I don't know what it's like to have disabilities that I don't have. And like, please call me in or share your own experience. Call me in if I misstep. We're all learning. I get things wrong. And my goal is to just start a conversation, really. I'm also trained in the US and I'm an American, so I've tried to learn some other things about disability in other countries, but this is going to be slightly US centric because it's what I know. Okay, so let's get started then. Also, if people want to stop, unmute, ask questions, I'll try to monitor the chat as well. We're going to get more interactive and more conversational as we go, but feel free to stop me in the meantime. So I wanted to talk about three main themes today. One is just sort of some background and definitions to get everybody on the same page. Then I want to talk about disability as a research topic in biomechanics. We're all interested in biomechanics, that's why we're here. And there's a lot of overlap with the disability world in some interesting ways, I think, in our field. Then I want to talk about disability allyship in practice. And the two spaces in which I'm going to talk about it are with your peers, and then from the perspective of a teacher or a teaching assistant in the classroom. So disability has many definitions. There are so many out there. And there are some that aren't great, but there are also a lot that are right. And a lot of aspects of different ones that I like. So I pulled up just three different definitions here. First of all, this is the legal definition for the United States Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is a person with a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. You can tell it's very individualized. It, relates to policy, but that is how the ADA defines it. Now, another definition, Saad Nagy a few years back came up with the definition that disability is a limitation in performance of socially defined roles and tasks within a social, cultural, and physical environment. I like this definition because it mentions socially defined roles as well as tasks that exist within the environment. And so that really brings in the idea of what we consider typical, what we expect of people, and how your ability to do certain things can be shaped by the environment you're in and by all sorts of different factors. And then lastly, for this slide, these definitions at least, there is a really great book called Demystifying Disability. I'm going to plug it several times because it's so good and it's short, and I'll share a link later. But the author of this book, who is a disabled activist, states that disability is a state of being or a natural part of the human experience. And that definition really comes from like owning an identity. And I thought it was super cool. And the way that she arrives at that definition is from asking a bunch of other people in her life or people she's interviewed how they define disability. And so you can see there's a big range in these definitions. Check the chat. Okay. Ooh, book club book. And I like it. Okay, so here are some basic statistics on disability to give some numbers. So the World Health Organization says that about 16% of the global population has a significant disability. So it's an estimate, but it even comes with a caveat of significant disability. So that would mean that there's more people than 16% of the population that experience any kind of disability. Then I wanted to drill down and ask, well, what about in higher education? Do we have the same, less, more people with disabilities going to college and maybe getting grad degrees? And the numbers that I found were in England, about 17.3% of students identify as disabled. In the United States, it's 19.4%. And one source I found for Australia is 7.2%. There's obviously lots of numbers for other countries. I just pulled a few representative of some of the larger numbers of IWB. And then I wanted to drill down further. What about our field? Part of why I launched into wanting to do more work in the disability space is when I read the newsletter from American Society of Biomechanics in 2021 that cited that 1.2% of ASB members report having a disability. And that is nowhere near the 16% of the global population or the 7 to 19% in each of these countries of people in higher education. I could not find numbers for ISB, for ANZSB. I don't know if they're collecting that data. And I don't know if they are, where to find it because I haven't found it. Spent a little time looking. But we at least know in the American Society of Biomechanics that that's a really big drop off from the percentage of students overall in university. And that led me to the question of, does a field like biomechanics exclude people with disabilities from entrance, whether they do that implicitly or explicitly? There is not an answer to this question. Like I have ideas. there are definitely things worth discussing, but I don't think there's a real answer, or if there is, we don't know it. Oh, that's a great question, Liz. I'm not sure if disability status is on our survey, but if it isn't, we better get it on there. I will do that. Yeah, because part of the reason why we don't have great stats for the other, for lots of organizations is they don't ask. Also, when I was just theorizing why we might not, or why this drop off happens, one of the things that I was thinking about is maybe people don't want to self-identify as disabled because there's a stigma behind it, and there shouldn't be. That's not fair, but it is real. Another thing I was thinking about is, do students get discouraged from taking on majors like exercise physiology or kinesiology, maybe because they think like if they have a physical disability, they're not strong enough to go on and become a physical therapist? Or in some cases, I've actually heard of people who get discouraged from joining certain programs because of their disabilities, or who get discouraged from going to grad school because of their disabilities. And so I think one place that we as biomechanists can really do some work is to ask ourselves those questions, to look at curricula, and especially if you're a professor and advisor, make sure that our field is more welcoming. All right. So we've got a little bit of background. Now I want to talk about disability as a biomechanical, or as a, yes, biomechanics research topic. So I really want to discuss this because, you know, many of us study disability, disabling conditions, humans or animals with disabilities and things like that. And so here's just 3 photo examples of either or of research or of people with disabilities that might be studied in biomechanics. And I always like to hope that people are performing these studies and doing this work for good reasons, and because they want to make an impact on the people that experience disabling conditions. As hopeful as I want to be, I know that that's not necessarily everybody's reason behind it. But I'm here to say that whether you're just interested in something for science's purpose or you are trying to make a difference, we should both be working together to eventually make progress so that people with disabilities are included and are represented and are treated with respect in all sorts of different ways. So just to give a little bit of background on how disability gets talked about within the disability research spectrum, there's a few different models, and here I'm talking about like generic types of models of disability. So the medical model is very individually focused, and it's focused on a person's health issues. It's very similar to that legal definition I talked about earlier. Then there is a social model, which brings in the fact that a person is a person in society, and the fact that like governments and all sorts of parts of our societies shape how people experience the world. Then there's the biopsychosocial model, which sort of marries those two and also brings in the psychological side of things. Because again, when you're a member of society, it can affect you psychologically, either well or not so well, depending on how things are. These are 2 images of the biopsychosocial model. The one on the left here is a little bit, there we go, a little bit more of just a model of medicine, but there are specific biopsychosocial models of disability. And then this one on the right is called the ICF. It was put out by the World Health Organization in the early 2000s. And these models just sort of really exist to give context and create ideas that people are multifaceted and that we should be considering all these different aspects when thinking about doing research and working with people with disabilities, and all people really. Now to talk a little bit about language. So there's a lot out there about language related to people with disabilities. And one of the main concepts is person first versus identity first language. So person first language, as it sounds, puts the person first. So you say person with, individual with, people who, things like that, and then talk about the condition, because it's important to remember that people are people first. So, for example, a person with a spinal cord injury or people who are blind. Identity first language kind of flips that, and basically it allows the person to own it as part of their identity, because disability can really shape who we are and how we experience the world. One example of this that I like to bring up is an autistic person, because in general, as a whole, the autistic community prefers identity first language. There are individuals who get to prefer exactly what they want. And if an individual tells you, I'd like to be referred to like this, then that's exactly the language you should use. But there's no right or wrong when you're speaking generally, whether you use person or identity first language, as long as you're trying to be respectful of people. I also have a short list. There are longer lists that exist out there, both in this great book and other places, of some things that are appropriate and some things that are inappropriate terms to use. Most of the things I've written in the appropriate category, I've written them person first. Identity first also falls under appropriate. But then there are things in the inappropriate category that are generally accepted as things we should not be saying when we're referring to certain people. Yes, I definitely was going to say this language changes when you change languages or when you change cultures. It is definitely specific, and there are certain terms that are not used in the US that might be totally fair game in other countries, or certain words and phrases that maybe it's a social norm to use, but that doesn't mean that they're okay. So yeah, it's Alexandria, that's a great point, that it varies a lot with the language and with the culture. And this is fairly US centric, like table of things. I wanted to just pull out a few of these examples. So for a long time, it was acceptable to say handicapped, but generally speaking, now we tend to say disabled or a person with a disability. Using victimization or like a person who suffers from something, generally not a great way to go. If someone claims it themselves, that's different. But when you're talking about a group of people, especially when you're doing science, they're not a victim of cerebral palsy. They're a person with cerebral palsy. Then we get into some of the phrases that are like really colloquially common: crazy, insane, and addiction or addict, things like that. Those are really not appropriate to refer to people with psychiatric conditions or substance use disorders. And I myself am really thinking and working hard to get like crazy and insane out of my regular language. It's so common and we mess up, but these are just things to think about, because when we use it in like as a social norm, we're kind of we're perpetuating stereotypes of people, and that's not really what we want to do. Also referring to people who don't have diagnosable pathology, yourself or others, as having a given pathology. Like, I really like things to be organized, but I don't say, oh yeah, my OCD makes me do this, because I don't have obsessive compulsive disorder. And I, again, don't want to perpetuate the stereotype that people with obsessive compulsive disorder just like things organized, and that's all that it's about, or that I know anything about what it's like to have a disorder that I don't have. So yeah, I just sort of wanted to pose, like, how many of these inappropriate terms have you heard used in not appropriate ways or not appropriate spaces? Because I've heard a lot of these.
I've certainly heard the differently abled one.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stretch before we settled on person first, or got to person first, that handicapped was out, but we didn't quite know what to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, like, there's handicapable, differently abled, things like that. I think those come from a place of trying to be positive about things. And like, I think that the people who use them are not trying in any way to be malicious. I just like, and this book that I read is like really great about talking about how, like, we shouldn't like always place it as somebody's like overcoming or somebody's inspirational. Like, yeah, inspiration is great, but then also, like, maybe we should just refer to disability as what it is.
For sure.
As I saw amputees in doing a lot of publications being used instead of people using amputation.
Yeah, I am definitely not an expert on I'm not an expert on that. I don't personally know, like, I've definitely seen it. I don't know, like, what is, if you would say that using amputees is fully a no-go because it is so common. But yeah, I've definitely seen it. And
I think it's, when we were writing, it's more, it's definitely stick with people with amputation or with amputations instead of using amputees. That's what I experienced.
Yeah, and I think as you look in historical literature versus like now too, you see it.
I'd like to just comment on what Janet said. I work in a space with limb loss as well, and whenever I work with any of my subjects, they refer to themselves as amputees, and so it's really difficult for me, because when I'm with them and I'm speaking with them, I use the language they want to use, and that's not the acceptable language in the literature. And when I go to conferences, I have to use the person first identity language because it's what's socially acceptable, even though I know that's what my subjects don't use and don't want to use. And so it feels, I guess that feels like a weird balance, because I'm using their data and I want to respect how they refer to themselves, but I have to be within the space that we find acceptable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And should we change what we say scientifically if it's not how a community likes to be referred to? I would argue yes, but I also can't, unilaterally change the scientific community. Abby, thank you for sharing that article.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know that obviously this is just one person's opinion and they wrote, this opinion piece, but it was something that I found interesting because as someone who does like to keep things orderly, I got teased a lot for having OCD when, that's obviously not something that I have been diagnosed with. So I think that it's important to definitely not use that language just off the bat, and just be aware, when other people might say something like that to you.
Yeah. And yeah, just like the whole reason why I posted this this table and like wanted to share some of these examples is I think we as individuals can work to change our language, and we as individuals can work to like to call people in and tell them when things are not okay. And that's a good allyship step. Okay. So to sort of wrap up my section here on being a researcher, people ask like, how can I be good at this? How can I be an ally? And if you study human participants, I think you can talk to them and make sure that you're treating them like a social human being with wants, needs, problems, wins, everything else. And like they are just people, as the same as all the rest of us. You can gain a lot of perspective from the stories they have to tell, but it's also not the onus is not on that person to teach you anything. So just treat them as humans. And if you learn from them, that's really cool. You can also, to my second point, whether you do or don't study human subjects, spend some time doing some work and learning about the condition that you study, or putting yourself in places where you can have interactions or learn more. And so I did a lot of shadowing when I was in undergrad and in grad school, because I'm an engineer and I really wanted to know what the physical therapy clinic is like for people with stroke. I also have seen there's some really great YouTube content out there. If you search like disability allyship, or just, look for disability related content. And when you do, make sure that it's coming from either the perspective of a disabled person or a really inclusive perspective, because there's a lot of that out there and it's so great. And we really, I think, would do well to raise up the voices of people who know what they're talking about. Also, yes, good comment, Abby, in the chat that, yeah, we tend to like refer to our people that come in to participate in research as participants, not as patients. If you're shadowing in the hospital, then you might refer to them as a patient. But like it's an extra good point on the language side as a researcher. And then finally, one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the impact of your research. So when you're coming up with a grant idea or writing a proposal or writing that significant section in your conference abstract, it's good to ask yourself, am I researching this purely because I think it's interesting, or in a way that could contribute to making change for a person? And I'm not saying that every piece of research has to immediately be clinically applicable. We do need to understand the science behind things, but you can use the overarching goal of making progress as a driver for asking the right questions in all the steps in between. Again, like if you talk to your research participants and you realize that a device that you really think would be great for them is something that they don't want, then maybe you should think about what they would want in a device. And ask yourself those sometimes hard questions about, does my research align with how participants either in my studies or people who have certain disabling conditions want to be treated, want to get better, things like that. And then you can also ask yourself, ask your peers and like your funding sources. Do they put enough emphasis on conditions relating to disability? You know, this is again an American perspective, because the NIH is what I know, but the National Institutes of Health, although they put out requests for applications in certain areas, it can relate to like what they're already seeing in the research or what their stack of applications is looking like time and time again. And so if we're submitting applications that have real tangible benefit or the potential for future benefit for people, then we can push in the direction of making progress for people. We can also advocate on behalf of people to direct more funding towards certain conditions or certain questions that are important. There are all sorts of petitions out there. There's like all sorts of science policy work that you can get involved in at many different levels. You can also donate money to charities or like go to community outreach events or organize community outreach events. Really just, there's so many different levels that you can step into allyship at, and you don't have to dive headfirst immediately or every day. But if we all work to do a little bit, I think that'll help. Okay, so does anybody have questions or things they want to discuss based on what we've talked about so far?
It's Mark. Can I speak?
Yeah.
So number one, just thank you for putting the allyship in the title of the event tonight, because it made it inviting for me to come in and join this, my first meeting to join in. And it's an important topic for me. We've been really lucky and fortunate to have been able to receive Int'l funding. And so we're working on rehabilitation after lower limb injury, as well as helping people after diabetic foot ulcer to help avoid recurrence of diabetic foot ulcer. So both topics that are really close to our research and heart. And so just grateful for the opportunity to have this type of gathering and bring up the topic. So just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you for joining. And yeah, that's exciting and impactful research, because there are a lot of people that will impact.
Yes, and multiple years that we've been working on it, so slow progress. And we've been funded through the SBIR grant program. We're a small business and fortunate enough to get SBIR funding, and continuing to do work in that area. And stroke is one of the things we hope to work on in the future. So again, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So
sorry, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
I unfortunately have to leave because it's really, really snowing and they're about to close the road and I need to get home. But I will watch the YouTube when it gets posted, and I just want to pose the question before I hop off so that it will be answered in the YouTube posting. One of the big concerns that I have as someone who has recently been diagnosed with disabilities that have very large stigmas in our community of academia is that I want to feel like I can share them so that I can empower the next, young female engineer with that disability. And I don't feel like I'm there yet. And so I guess I'm just kind of hoping that at some point in the conversation as it continues, and I hope, especially when it gets to in the classroom, it'll get there. How do we encourage ourselves and our peers to share their experiences in these environments where I know I'm going to face that stigma, and I know that the researchers around me are going to maybe say things that will make me feel uncomfortable around them the next time I'm in the room. So I know that's kind of a heavy topic, but I really hope that's going to be addressed, and I really appreciate you having this. And with that said, thank you so much. I'm hoping I get home safe.
Yes, please get home safe. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
me
you.
and asking that question, Julia. Yeah, I definitely want to come back to that as we go on, because I'll address it a little bit, but I have perspectives and I'd love to hear more people discuss. I'm going to move forward a little, and then I think we can get into talking about that more. Okay, so on to allyship in practice. So with your peers, and like, I mean this kind of at all levels, but you know, anybody who is working with you, or you know, a fellow student if you're a student, things like that. Just, you know, sort of this starts really generic, but you never know what somebody's going through. And I think it's important to just be open to hearing about different experiences that are different from your own. And, you know, that fits for all sorts of different identities of people. But it's really important for people with disabilities, because people get a lot of interesting questions. And the burden should not be on them to teach somebody about their disability, or to even tell people they have a disability. If they want to own it, then that is their choice. But if they don't, then we should respect that as well, because as an ally, the work should be on us. Then coming at things from an accessibility perspective, the more we learn about accessibility, the more we can make it the default and not the exception. So some things to sort of ponder are, if you're hosting meetings, are they in an accessible building? Are they all the way on the other side of campus from where people are going to be located? Do you offer closed captioning or recording of your sessions? Do you put alt text in your media? So for people who don't know about alt text, you can, when you're putting something together, like making a PDF, or like when I was making my PowerPoint for this, you can right click on your image and there's an alt text option, and you can give it some text that then a screen reader will come across the photo and read that text, so that a person who needs to use a screen reader doesn't just get left out from all the images. And there's some great guides on the internet about what kinds of things to write in alt text and sharing and things like that. But, you know, as someone who has like experienced being completely left out of stuff because people just didn't think that it was not, that the things were not accessible, it really led me to learn more and to try my hardest to just lead with certain accessibility practices rather than adopting them when somebody asked for it. For example, I have a lot of foods that I can't eat. So like one random thing about being a grad student is pretty much every event you go to that provides free food gives you pizza. I can't have dairy, so I can't eat pizza. And yeah, it's fine if I'm going to a session and I can't have the free food. But if it's a whole day event where you're feeding everyone lunch and that's the only offering, then I'm not eating that day, or I have to bring my own food or something like that. So there's just all sorts of different things that thinking a little bit ahead or doing a little bit of research about what accessibility means can just open a lot of doors for a lot of people. Okay, so I would like to do a breakout room activity. This is gonna be about 10 minutes. I might try to cut it down to about 8 just so I can not draw out all of today for too long. But we're gonna post the link to this activity oh, thanks, Anna. So there's the activity sheet. And there are instructions at the top of it. I'm gonna put people into a couple of breakout rooms. Let's see, we got 14 people, so I think I'm gonna do 2 randomly assigned breakout rooms. And there's 2 readings in there. So I'd like you as a breakout group to first decide who's gonna read reading 1 first and who's gonna read reading 2 first. You're both gonna read both readings. I just want some people to do it in different orders. Then once you make that decision, everybody read the paragraph. Think about the questions that I've placed underneath that reading. Then read the opposite one, from whichever one you started with. Think about those questions and then come together as a group and discuss. So I'm going to start the breakout rooms. Please chat to me if you have any questions about this, or if you cannot pull up the document. Where's my mouse? There it is. Okay. So I am creating 2 breakout rooms and opening the rooms now.